Hello, welcome to Trace Neuroanalytics, episode 5. My name is Nikki Wittridge, and today we'll be looking at the first EEG recorded by someone who is just getting set up with their new cognionics system. So if you're interested in a report like this yourself, with a video and a summary document, you can head on over to traceneuro.co, and thanks for watching. So let's have a look at this data. This data has been imported into WinEEG, and right now we are in the standard montage that it was imported in. So on the left here, we can see each one of these channels is being compared to the reference. And so the first thing we're going to do is switch it over into an average reference montage. So we use the database version 2 average. And already we can see that some of the additional channels that were present, that were digital channels and ECG and other sort of extraneous items are now gone, thankfully. We still have this ACC2, which I'm not quite sure what that is. So I'm going to click on the montage button and just see. Who knows? So we're just going to get rid of it. I'm going to click OK. And so this is the eyes open data. And if you're unfamiliar, you know, the front of the head is up here at the top of the screen. The back of the head is here at the bottom. And even numbers are on the right side of the head. Odd numbers are on the left side of the head. So this looks pretty typical for eyes open data in that we can see eye blink up here, as well as some of this faster activity, which is muscle activity. And we're just going to scroll through and see what we find. But so far, this looks like very reasonable quality data that's going to be usable. And I would say, even though we haven't really cleaned this up quite yet, we're seeing that there's a decent amount of fast activity, right? So even if we just take a look at CZ, which is at the top of the head, we're not expecting for there to be a whole lot of sort of muscle activity contamination. We do see a decent amount of fast activity. Oh, and for some reason, we're already halfway through this record. So let's go back to the beginning. So we're going to scroll through and see what we see. So we see some alpha activity at the back of the head here, and to a certain extent, it is projecting forwards. It's normal to see alpha at the back of the head. This is sort of interesting because we're seeing this alpha activity more focalized around P7 and T7, which are the left mid and posterior temporal electrode sites. Eye blink. More eye blink. More of this left temporal alpha activity. Interesting feature here, where there's this sort of spiky appearance to the alpha band activity. Looks like it is phase inverted from left to right. So if I drag T8 up to T7, we can see this is sort of an alpha generator that is in the thalamus and projecting from left to right. We're noticing a pattern after the eye blink. We see sort of a little resurgence of this posterior alpha activity, which is quite common. And we see some of this activity here at P3, which looks like it could be mu activity, although we would tend to see that at C3 and C4. I only say that because it has a slightly more monomorphic sort of pointy appearance than the rest of the alpha that we saw earlier. So not really a finding, but something to keep our eye out for. It's very good data. The frontal muscle tension and eye blink will be able to be cleaned up quite readily with the ICA de-artifacting. Again, this focal left temporal alpha activity. And generally a fast background rhythmicity. When the background isn't really in the alpha range, it tends to be faster than that. So we'll start by cleaning this up with ICA. So I'm going to right click in the top here to make the selection. And we're going to put in a little bit more of a low cut just to flatten out this beginning part. Actually, we're going to omit that from the ICA de-artifacting. Not a whole bunch of line noise, but we might as well put the notch filter in for what's appropriate for North America. So it's recorded in Alaska. We're going to use the standard Infomax ICA algorithm and see what we get. Oftentimes the first component is an eye blink component, so now we are going to vet that component. And we do see that this is eliminating a majority of the frontal eye blink deflection. And this is an interesting epoch right here because we also have lateral eye movement included here. And I am skeptical if we're going to be able to get that component out with what's being decomposed here. So I don't love these topographies. Anytime when you start to see sort of these petri dish-like appearances early on in the topographies, right? And we're already starting to get them at the fifth topography, basically. It means we're not getting the greatest spatial filtering. So I'm going to try a different ICA algorithm. The TON ICA tends to have a little bit more of a granular spatial filtering. And what I'm looking for is a better lateral eye movement component, which it looks like we now have. So I've now selected that first eye blink component, which is about the same, and we now have a second component down here, which is actually the fifth one down, which is exactly what we would like to see for lateral eye movement, which is where the positive and the negative of the dipole are on opposite sides of the front of the head. And lo and behold, just by selecting those two, we have removed both the lateral and the eye blink from the EEG. So I'm just scrolling through to ensure that we didn't remove any real EEG, and it seems that we haven't to a significant extent. And then all that remains is to eliminate the rest of this muscle tension, if possible. That looks like it's doing a good job. And again, not squashing too much of the background rhythmicity. So I'm scanning through this corrected EEG little window right here to verify that the activity at F7 and F3 doesn't look excessively attenuated when compared to the surrounding channels. This is going to pull out the remainder of the noise at FP1. And this component is going to pull out the muscle tension coming in from the left jaw. With that one, we want to be extra careful since it is so highly spatially constrained, that we're also not removing the alpha band activity. And it looks like this has done a fantastic job, because here we have an abundance of that alpha band activity, and it's really hasn't really been squashed in a meaningful way, although it is being slightly reduced, right? But to an extent that it is workable. And that might be most of what we wanted to get out as far as artifact is concerned. There's a little bit of buzz going on at T8. That's going to clean up that right muscle tension. Unfortunately, it's also going to squash things a little bit. So how badly do we want that EMG out versus how willing are we to ignore the excessive high frequency activity that it's going to show up in the spectra in honor of preserving the slower stuff that this would otherwise be squashing. I'm going to leave that unselected, and we're going to call this good enough for government work. We're going to manually clip that section out. And now I'm just going to start grabbing some screenshots of what seem like the most sort of salient features of this EEG, just by doing some screenshots. And I have my Google document open for this report, which isn't really, for clinical purposes. This is just sort of exploration. And this is the first of 2 files, so we want to make sure that we're notating that. And how would we describe this? Well, good background alpha organization with some left temporal alpha excess, let's say. Right, and nothing really jumped out at us when we were scrolling through it the first time, but the second time is an opportunity to go through with a little bit of a closer eye now that we've gotten rid of the non-cortical activity, or at least most of it. This is interesting here. Sort of a spiky feature, not really sure what that is. Could be some sort of an event-related potential. Has phase inversion from front to back, and is followed by more of that sort of left posterior temporal slowing. Kind of interesting. More of this sort of spiky stuff, a T7, P7. Right, so when we see that alpha activity there in larger amplitude in the left temporal region, we start to wonder what might be causing that, right? Typically we see the highest alpha amplitudes, sort of in the central, parietal, and occipital regions. And in this case, there does seem to be a focus in the left temporal region. So it could be, vascular changes there. Could be a head injury. Excessive alpha in a particular region, it's not necessarily alarming, and alpha is the idling rhythm of the cortex. So it's a sign that that particular region is kind of struggling to engage and activate like we might want it to. Here's another example of this left posterior temporal alpha activity. Another interesting sort of spiky appearance here that seems to have its focus in that same region. And another one here, right? And there's field and phase, so this is not just an electrode pop. So we're starting to notice a pattern. And overall, there's also plenty of beta activity in this record. Right, we got rid of the muscle, but riding on top of the alpha, there is plenty of faster activity. So there's no question that there's plenty of kind of processing and activation happening here. And this is a little bit of EMG that we did not get out with the ICA. So I'm just going to snip out that section. And we're ready to compute the spectra. We're going to select the entire file, fill by band range, and lo and behold, we have very healthy alpha tuning and a distribution that is not ideal in the sense that we'd like to see alpha really predominate in the head, and the amount of alpha that we're seeing up front may be some indication of drowsiness. So it looks like kind of the biggest peak that we see at PZ is here at 10.25 hertz. And then I'm also going to pluck out the slower edge of alpha at 9.03 hertz. And we can see this sort of jagged appearance here because of the sort of spiky nature of some of the activity that we saw originating from P7, which confuses the fast Fourier transform. And if I scale this up so that we can pick out a beta peak, again, the beta by its nature tends to be sort of more diffuse in the frequency spectrum, but we'll pick something out anyways. So why don't we pick this out right here at 19.5 hertz. And just for funsies, when we pick out this little feature here, which again isn't really a peak, but points us to where there might be some of that spiky stuff going on. We did see it phase inverted front to back and also left to right. So we'll go to print preview so that we can get a view of this spectra that we can then screenshot. And WinEEG always likes to take its time with this first print preview. So if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. And this data was the first of two files because there was some concern around whether it would be usable. And so far this is great. This is fine. The beauty of the ICAD artifacting is that we can generally get out the eye blink and the muscle tension quite easily. And we have a couple of options now since we were provided with 2 different eyes open files. And we were just looking at this eyes open 1. We can take a look at the eyes open 2. But I am going to breeze through it since we've already identified a couple of relevant features. And I'm really just going to be looking for if there's anything kind of alarming that we would not want to miss, which I'm not really expecting. And it looks like we're sort of seeing a similar pattern here as far as T7 and P7 having a larger amounts of that alpha activity. Here's some muscle tension or a swallow perhaps. Okay, so I'm satisfied with the amount of eyes open data that we have. And I'm going to close out of these. We'll save this one that's been artifacted. And now we're on to the eyes closed. And this looks like the longer of the 2 files. So we're going to process this one, switch into the average reference, remove this additional accessory channel, and take a look at what we have. So as always, we expect to see more alpha activity in the eyes closed, which we do see. There's a decent amount of lateral eye movement, which we can see as this slow movement that is phase inverted from left to right. Alpha is generalizing to the front of the head as the subject goes through stages of drowsing. And during this larger burst of alpha, we do see the intensity of the alpha at that left posterior temporal site. So I'm going to run the ICA. And we'll run it again without this first section selected, since that can tend to throw it off a little bit. We'll also add our slightly more aggressive low cut. And we're not going to be taking out much here because mainly we're just trying to eliminate this frontal EMG. We're left with a little bit still at T7, which we may not have a component for, unfortunately. That's not really doing it for us. Let's just take a peek and see if the TON algorithm will give us a little bit more spatial specificity. And already this looks cleaner than what we were just able to get out. C3 has this buzz in it as well, which is not uncommon given the location of those jaw muscles. This is an alpha dropout that's associated with drowsing. Little electrode pop here at FZ. Manually cutting that out. And let's calculate the spectra. And this is where we start to see that really the left temporal region is operating a little differently from everywhere else. If we pick out the peak at PZ, we see a nice 10.01 hertz. And at P7, there's this slower aspect. And the slower edge of alpha does tend to track ischemic changes. And O1 is really standing up, so we don't really see it, but you can see that there is this intensity of that slower edge of alpha here at P7. Okay, so this looks like a great EEG recording overall. And as far as what's going on in this brain, seems like a very healthy brain overall. I know I'm not sure the age of this individual, but the 10 hertz alpha tuning, certainly nothing wrong with that. Functionally, I would wonder if there are any challenges associated with that left mid and posterior temporal region. That could be an area to focus on with photobiomodulation or with neurofeedback potentially. And we do see that there is a decent amount of drowsing in the eyes open, as evidenced by the amount of alpha activity that we see at the front of the head in the eyes open condition. So, right, classically, sleep onset difficulty is associated with beta activity at CZ, and we do see a decent amount of beta activity. So it's possible that inhibiting that activity with neurofeedback, oftentimes, you would incorporate that in a, SMR type training at CZ. In this case, you could do a bipolar montage of CZ to P7 and inhibit the alpha, reward the SMR band, and inhibit the beta band, which would have the potential benefit of activating that left temporal region and promoting more effective sleep onset, which over time we would hope would help clear up some of this frontal alpha activity in the eyes open. So those are my initial thoughts on this EEG. Again, I don't really have any other clinical or personal sort of background information on this particular subject. So I will refrain from offering any sort of further commentary or suggestions other than that this is a great recording. And it looks like, there were good impedances all around, and that this is a promising first start in recording high-quality EEG. So feel free to ask any questions down in the comments. I can do a follow-up episode of this if there are sort of goals or clinical symptoms that might want to be addressed more specifically. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Trace Neuroanalytics.